sweetheart deal, accusing Ofwat of letting the company kick its fine down the road. Thames Water insists customer bills will not be used to pay the penalties, but with debts mounting and rescue talks ongoing, fears are growing the company could collapse into a government-run special administration.
A report found a UK schoolgirl who stabbed teachers had knives, a BB gun, and war memorabilia in her possession. A 13-year-old girl who stabbed 2 teachers and a pupil in Carmarthenshire School last year had previously been caught with a knife, BB gun, and war memorabilia, a damning review has revealed. The attack at Ysgol Dyffryn Aman in April 2024 left teachers Fiona Elias and Liz Hopkin, as well as a 14-year-old pupil, injured. Earlier this year, the girl was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 15 years detention. The independent report, led by Gladys Rhodes White, found the teenager had a troubling fascination with weapons, Hitler, and war memorabilia, and would even speak in German and Russian. Despite repeated warnings, including the discovery of knives in her school bag and threats to other pupils, agencies failed to fully share and act upon information. While mental health services were approached, her father declined offers of support, and a referral to the Prevent program was not pursued. The review concluded that while the attack could not have been predicted, missed opportunities and poor information sharing meant the girl was not given the targeted help she needed. The case has sparked urgent calls for better safeguarding, mental health support, and closer monitoring of at-risk children.
Ofgem announces a 2% rise in UK household energy bills, adding £35 to annual costs from October.
UK households will see their energy bills rise by an average of £35 from October after regulator Ofgem confirmed a 2% increase in the price cap. The change will push the typical annual bill up from £1,720 to £1,755, reversing earlier predictions of a small fall. The rise is partly due to the expansion of the Warm Home Discount Scheme, which will add about £15 to bills while extending £150 in support to 2.7 million more vulnerable households. But Ofgem warned global instability and uncertainty over U.S. trade policy continue to keep wholesale energy prices volatile. Bills have fallen from the record highs of early 2023, when the cap peaked at £4,279. But many families are still struggling to pay off debts from that period. Consumer groups say lower-income households, renters, and pensioners will feel the squeeze most as winter approaches. Labour blamed the former Conservative government's reliance on fossil fuels for keeping bills high, while ministers argued that only a shift to clean homegrown energy will bring prices down permanently. Ofgem will announce the next quarterly adjustment in November, which will set bills for the start of 2026.
Graham Simpson quits Scottish Conservatives to join Reform UK, as Farage launches new push on immigration and Hollywood politics. Conservative MSP Graham Simpson has defected to Reform UK, becoming the party's only representative at Holyrood. The Central Scotland MSP made the announcement at a press conference in Broxburn alongside Reform leader Nigel Farage. Simpson, who has served since 2016, admitted leaving the Conservatives after decades of membership was an enormous wrench, but said Reform offered the chance to build something new, exciting and lasting. He becomes the second Conservative to leave the party's Scottish Parliament group in a week. A spokesperson for the Scottish Conservatives said they remained focused on holding the SNP and Labour to account, accusing Farage of being content with another 5 years of SNP government. Labour branded Simpson's move an attempt to save his own career, dismissing Reform as Tories by another name. The SNP's Stephen Gethans, meanwhile, attacked Reform's immigration plans as extraordinarily damaging. Farage used the event to unveil his Operation Restoring Justice scheme, pledging to deport 600,000 migrants in 5 years if his party won power. He also promised Reform would appoint a Scottish leader before next year's Holyrood election. Polls suggest immigration is rising sharply as a priority issue for Scottish voters, now ranking behind only health and the cost of living.
Core maths entries rise 20% in 2025, but concerns remain over students' math skills beyond GCSE and university readiness. Mathematics continues to dominate as the most popular A-level subject, with further maths also seeing rapid growth. But concerns remain about young people who stop studying this subject after 16. Core Maths, introduced in 2014 to address this gap, offers students practical skills such as data handling, statistics, probability, and spreadsheets. It is aimed at those who passed GCSE Maths but do not take the subject further at A-level. Despite financial incentives for schools, take-up remains low compared with demand. This year, 15,327 students sat Core Maths, a 20% increase on 2024. But research from the Royal Society shows that fewer than 1 in 10 students who could benefit are actually enrolled. Experts warn that students entering university courses in psychology, business, geography, and health sciences often lack the mathematical fluency needed, leaving them struggling with quantitative elements. The government has reaffirmed its commitment to expanding post-16 maths, and universities have expressed support, but only a handful currently reward Core Maths with lower entry offers. The Royal Society has called for reform, recommending compulsory maths and data education until 18 to prepare students for the careers of the future.
Keith Gadd, jailed in 2006, died after serving nearly 5 times longer than original sentence under scrapped IPP terms. A prisoner trapped on a controversial abolish sentence has died by suicide after spending 13 years longer in jail than his original tariff. Keith Gadd, 60, was serving an imprisonment for public protection, or IPP sentence, handed down in 2006. Although his tariff was just 3 years and 5 months, he was never released. He is one of 94 IPP prisoners to have taken their own lives, with the UN branding the system psychological torture. IPP sentences were scrapped in 2012, but nearly 3,000 prisoners remain trapped under their terms. Mr. Gadd died at HMP Bristol on 9 March 2023, weeks after the government rejected cross-party calls to resentence remaining IPP prisoners. A watchdog report found staff missed key warning signs despite his history of suicidal thoughts. Fellow inmates had raised concerns before his death, but these were not acted upon. He had also been waiting months for ministerial approval to transfer to an open prison. The Ombudsman concluded HMP Bristol was an inappropriate place for him, offering little support amid unsafe conditions. Campaigners say hopes of release were shattered when resentencing was refused. The government says it continues to work with groups to support remaining IPP prisoners.
ONS reveals fertility in England, Wales, and Scotland drops to record lows, sparking fears over aging populations and pensions. The fertility rate across England and Wales has fallen for the 3rd year running to reach a record low, according to new figures from the Office for National Statistics, ONS. In 2024, the total fertility rate stood at 1.41 children per woman, down from 1.42 in 2023, the lowest level since comparable records began in 1938. Scotland fared even worse, with its fertility rate falling to just 1.25, alongside the lowest number of births since records began in 1855. Despite a small 0.6% rise in live births last year, population growth outweighed the increase, driving the overall fertility rate down. ONS data shows parents are also getting older. The average age of mothers rose to 31 and fathers to 33.9. Regional disparities were notable. Luton recorded the highest fertility rate at 2, while the City of London had the lowest at just 0.32. Only London and the West Midlands saw regional increases. Politicians and experts warn that the long-term decline could strain public finances as fewer working-age adults support an aging population. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson called the trend worrying and stressed the need to make it easier for women to have children.
Canberra expels Iranian ambassador after intelligence links Tehran to orchestrated anti-Semitic threats and attacks targeting Jewish communities. Australia has expelled Iran's ambassador after intelligence services concluded that Tehran was directly involved in orchestrating anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the decision in Canberra, describing Iran's actions as a hostile breach of sovereignty and security.
Gathered enough credible intelligence to reach a deeply disturbing conclusion that the Iranian government directed at least 2 of these attacks.
He said Australian intelligence agencies had uncovered credible and disturbing evidence that the Iranian regime directed threats and attacks targeting Jewish communities in Australia. Foreign Minister Penny Wong confirmed the ambassador was summoned and given 48 hours to leave the country. This government will not tolerate foreign-directed intimidation or violence against Australians, she said. The expulsion marks a significant escalation in Australia's relationship with Iran, already strained over Iran's human rights abuses and its support for militant groups. Opposition leaders backed the move, calling it decisive and necessary to protect vulnerable communities. Jewish community leaders welcomed the action, saying it sends a clear signal that Australia stands against anti-Semitism. Iranian officials have not yet publicly responded. Security has been stepped up around synagogues and Jewish schools, with police saying there is no ongoing threat, but that vigilance remains high.
Despite Labour's promise to scrap failed JRG scheme, students face record fees until at least 2027.
Arts students will continue paying up to $50,000 for degrees until at least 2027, despite the Albanese government declaring the coalition's Job-Ready Graduate Scheme a failure and pledging reform. The Morrison-era policy hiked fees for arts, humanities and law while lowering costs for science and teaching. Western Sydney University Vice-Chancellor George Williams said the earliest realistic date for change was 2027, warning the delay risks long-term damage. The government has established the Australian Tertiary Education Commission to redesign university funding, but legislation to formally set it up won't pass before 2026. Professor Andrew Norton from Monash University said new fee structures could not be introduced until after that process. Williams argued that disadvantaged students, Indigenous Australians and women are hardest hit, with many deterred from study altogether. Chancellor Jennifer Westacott stressed the importance of arts degrees in building critical thinking skills in an AI-driven economy. Education Minister Jason Clare has acknowledged reform is needed, but says it is not the government's top priority. Labour backbenchers are now pushing for faster action. For now, students beginning arts degrees in 2025 and 2026 will still face some of the highest fees in Australia.
The New South Wales government has unveiled plans to complete a long-abandoned train station in Woollera and rezone surrounding suburbs for high-rise housing, in a move expected to deliver up to 10,000 new homes over the next 15 years. Premier Chris Minns said finishing the half-built Woollera station, abandoned in the 1970s after local opposition, would cost $150 million to $200 million, far less
less than building new metro stops. The surrounding area, including parts of Woollera and Edgecliff, would be rezoned to allow towers up to 21 stories. The proposal has already sparked backlash from residents and local leaders. Woollera Mayor Sarah Dixon warned the plan would damage the suburb's beauty, while community groups questioned the need for another station so close to Edgecliff and Bondi Junction. Critics also argue the scheme will mostly create luxury apartments, doing little to fix Sydney's housing affordability crisis. Housing advocates, however, say increasing density in wealthy, well-located suburbs is long overdue. Deputy Chair of Sydney YIMBY, Melissa Neighbour, called the project a necessary step in a crisis this severe, adding it would still allow time for consultation and planning. Minns insists the project will go ahead, describing it as too important for Sydney to delay.
2 police officers killed, 1 injured in Porepunkah shooting as armed suspect escapes into the bush. Manhunt underway. A massive manhunt is underway in rural Victoria after a gunman shot dead 2 police officers and injured a third in the small town of Porepunkah. Victoria Police Commissioner Mike Bush confirmed that a 59-year-old detective and a 35-year-old senior constable were killed when 10 officers executed a search warrant at a rural property on Tuesday morning. A third officer remains in hospital after undergoing surgery.
Line of duty. One of those officers was a 59-year-old detective, the other officer, a 35-year-old senior constable. One of our other good officers.
The suspect, described as heavily armed and dangerous, fled on foot into nearby bushland. Police have cordoned off a wide area and urged locals to remain indoors. Specialist units have been deployed. The suspect was known to police, though the purpose of the raid has not been disclosed. Authorities are also attempting to locate his wife and 2 children, but there is no evidence they accompanied him. The killings echo the 2022 Wyambilla, Queensland shooting, which saw 2 police officers ambushed and murdered by armed extremists. Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen called today's events heartbreaking and vowed every resource would be used to apprehend the suspect. Police unions say officers across the state are shaken but determined. Commissioner Bush called it a terrible day for Victoria Police, adding 2 of our dedicated officers were murdered in cold blood.
UK to evacuate 40 Gaza students for scholarships. Israel's approval and complex logistics remain critical hurdles ahead. The UK government has approved plans to evacuate around 40 Palestinian students from Gaza so they can take up fully funded university scholarships in Britain. 9 of them will receive assistance under the Chevening scheme, while about 30 others are supported through privately funded programs. This marks the first such evacuation since the Hamas-Israel war erupted in October 2023. However, each student's exit requires approval from Israel, posing a significant obstacle amid deteriorating diplomatic relations after the UK announced it would recognize a Palestinian state if Israel failed to meet specific conditions. Students will first be moved to a third country in the region for biometric visa checks before travelling to the UK. A Home Office source described the effort as complex and challenging, but stressed that the Home Secretary wants students to take up their places. The move follows months of campaigning by academics, politicians and rights groups. More than 80 Palestinian students hold UK offers this year, but only those with funding are covered under the latest decision. Meanwhile, the UK also plans to evacuate critically ill children for urgent medical treatment.
TfL launches campaign urging passengers to stop loudspeaker calls and music. Bylaws allow fines or ejections if ignored. Transport for London, TfL, has launched a campaign to curb disruptive behaviour from passengers who use mobile phone loudspeakers to play music or make calls on buses and the tube. The move follows TfL research showing 70% of 1,000 passengers surveyed considered loudspeaker noise a nuisance, with many describing it as stressful. Posters urging travellers to use headphones or hands-free devices will appear first on the Elizabeth line this week, before rolling out across the wider network in autumn. TfL bylaws prohibit playing music or streaming content in ways that cause distress or annoyance. Enforcement officers usually ask offenders to stop, but persistent refusal can lead to passengers being removed or reported for prosecution. Commuters interviewed by BBC Radio London welcomed the campaign, describing the behaviour as horrendous and impolite. One passenger recalled trying to politely signal disapproval to a woman playing loud music, but she didn't care. TfL said the posters will also remind passengers to look up from their screens in case someone else needs their seat. The campaign comes as more tube lines gain 4G and 5G coverage, increasing mobile use underground.
Cash-strapped UK councils sell public buildings to cut £122 billion debt. Critics warn public value is disappearing forever. A BBC investigation has revealed that communities across the UK are paying the price of spiralling council borrowing, as town halls sell off publicly owned buildings in a bid to manage a combined £122 billion debt burden. Schools, care homes, leisure centres, nurseries, a boxing gym and even an Olympic legacy equestrian centre are among hundreds of sites sold under capitalisation directions, grounded by government. These powers allow councils to offload assets or take out short-term loans to fund basic services, but critics say the approach is unsustainable. Dr. Jonathan Carr West, Chief Executive of the Local Government Information Unit, warned what was public value is now passing into private hands, and that won't come back. The Shared Data Unit found council debt rose 7% last year, equating to £1,700 for every UK resident. Croydon, which owes £1.5 billion, has already sold £210 million worth of public buildings, while Greenwich is planning to sell its equestrian centre despite a 4,500-strong petition to save it. The government admits the funding system is broken, but says reforms and billions in new grants are on the way. Councils, however, argue only a large-scale debt write-off can prevent further asset sales.
Food price inflation in the UK has surged to its highest level in 18 months, driven by rising costs of everyday staples, including chocolate, butter and eggs, according to new figures. The British Retail Consortium's BRC Shop Price Monitor showed food inflation at 4.2% in the year to August, up from 4% in July, marking the fastest pace since February last year. The figures echo separate Office for National Statistics data, which also highlighted steep increases in key household items. Helen Dickinson, BRC Chief Executive, said poor cocoa harvests linked to climate change and disease had sent chocolate prices soaring. She also noted significant increases in butter and eggs due to tight supply, high demand and rising labour costs. Independent retailers are feeling the squeeze. Kate Rumsey, owner of Rumsey's Chocolaterie in Oxfordshire, said chocolate prices had trebled from £4,000 to £13,000 a tonne since 2023, forcing her to raise product prices by up to 20% and cut some menu items entirely. While parents have seen some relief with lower back-to-school costs for clothing and books, experts warn households may need to reassess budgets as bills and grocery prices climb.
The number of babies born in Scotland has fallen to the lowest level since records began in 1855, according to new data from National Records of Scotland, NRS.
In 2024, 45,763 live births were registered, 172 fewer than in 2023. Scotland's total fertility rate also slipped from 1.27 to 1.25, well below the 2.1 required for population replacement without migration. Demographers said the decline reflected long-term population changes. Birth rates have steadily dropped since the 1960s, when most mothers were in their 20s. Today, the majority of births are to women aged 30 to 34, a group that accounted for more than a third of all births last year. Scotland's cities recorded the lowest fertility rates, with Edinburgh at 0.99, followed by Glasgow 1.05 and Aberdeen 1.06. Midlothian 1.66 recorded the highest. While births fell, infant outcomes showed improvement. Stillbirth and infant death rates both dropped to 3.5 per thousand, the lowest on record. Yet overall, deaths continue to outnumber births by a wide margin, 16,528 in 2024 alone. Philippa Haxton of NRS said, "This was a year of record lows, reflecting long-term demographic change in Scotland."
Royal Mail has temporarily suspended the delivery of parcels to the United States following the imposition of new tariffs by the Trump administration. The company said the measures, which took effect this week, have created significant uncertainty around customs clearance and processing times, making it difficult to guarantee reliable service. Letters are not affected, but all parcels and small packages destined for the US will be held until further notice. The tariffs are part of a broader trade dispute, with Washington targeting a range of imports in retaliation for what it claims are unfair practices by overseas trading partners. While the primary focus has been on major trading blocs, the measures have had a knock-on effect for postal services that move goods across borders. Royal Mail apologized to customers, saying it was working with international partners and UK authorities to find a solution as quickly as possible. Businesses reliant on exports to the US, particularly small retailers, have expressed concern about delays and potential financial losses. The company said it will provide regular updates and resume shipments once a stable framework for processing is confirmed.
The UK's late-night economy has shrunk dramatically since the pandemic, with 1 in 4 venues closing their doors since 2020, according to new industry figures. Nightclubs, bars and live music venues have been among the hardest hit, with campaigners warning of a crisis for the nighttime economy. Rising energy bills, business rates, staffing shortages and reduced consumer spending have combined to force closures across the country. The Nighttime Industries Association, or NTIA, said the trend risks creating nighttime deserts in towns and cities, stripping communities of what it called cornerstones of cultural and social life. The group is calling on the government to provide urgent tax cuts and targeted support to prevent further losses. Michael Kill, NTIA's chief executive, warned, "We're seeing a slow erosion of the UK's world-renowned nightlife. Without immediate action, entire local economies and generations of cultural spaces will be lost." Hospitality groups say surviving venues are struggling to balance soaring costs with customers' reduced disposable income. Many have already cut operating hours or scaled back events. Industry leaders argue that protecting nighttime businesses is vital not only for jobs, but also for tourism and community well-being.
ANZ faces backlash after mistaken emails told staff to return laptops, revealing job losses before official conversations began.
Australian bank ANZ has issued an unreserved apology after more than 100 employees received automated emails instructing them to return their laptops before being formally told they were losing their jobs. The Financial Times reported that discussions about redundancies were originally scheduled for next week, but the email mishap exposed exit dates early, sparking distress across the workforce. Bloomberg later reported that ANZ accelerated its plans, informing all affected employees of their futures by Thursday. In a follow-up email, Bruce Rush, acting head of ANZ's retail division, wrote, "Unfortunately, these emails indicate an exit date for some of our colleagues before we've been able to share their outcome with them. I deeply regret the distress this situation may have caused." The bank offered counselling support to the staff involved. However, the financial sector union condemned the blunder as a disgusting way for workers to learn about job cuts through a botched email instead of a respectful conversation. The incident comes as new CEO Nuno Matos pushes for efficiency measures and a strategic reset. While ANZ's share price has risen 18% in 2025, employee morale remains under strain.
Australia Post halts some shipments to the US as new customs duties and clearance rules disrupt international parcel services. Australia Post has announced it will temporarily stop sending certain parcels to the United States, citing changes to US customs rules that have disrupted international shipping operations. The move follows the US government's decision to end the long-standing de minimis exemption, which allowed packages valued under $800 to enter duty-free. From now on, nearly all goods shipped into the country will attract import duties and taxes, depending on their origin. Australia Post confirmed that in response to the new rules, it has paused the acceptance of some packages until updated systems and handling procedures are in place. The decision affects both individual consumers and small businesses that rely on e-commerce deliveries to American customers. Like many postal operators globally, we are adapting to the new U.S. customs requirements, a spokesperson said. We are working with authorities and partners to minimize disruption, and services will resume as soon as possible. The suspension comes amid wider concerns among exporters and retailers that rising duties and stricter customs checks will slow trade flows, add costs for consumers, and disrupt small business operations reliant on overseas markets.
Rich Brown reveals he is bisexual, breaking AFL silence on LGBTQ players and challenging toxic locker room culture. Former Australian rules footballer Mitch Brown has become the first openly gay or bisexual man in the 129-year history of the AFL. Brown, who played 94 games for the West Coast Eagles between 2007 and 2016, told the Daily Aus that hiding his sexuality took a heavy toll and was a major factor in his early retirement. It was never once an opportunity to speak openly or explore your feelings in a safe way, he said. The AFL had been the only major men's professional sport in the world without an openly gay or bisexual player, even post-retirement. Brown said he hoped his announcement would create safety, comfort and space for others. He also spoke candidly about the hyper-masculine culture of the sport, recalling homophobic slurs on the field and even a teammate once saying he'd rather be in a cage full of lions than shower next to a gay man. Experts say the revelation is historic, though real change depends on grassroots culture. Brown is being very open about the problems that need fixing, said Monash University researcher Eric Dennison. Brown, now 36, urged empathy and told closeted players, "I see you and you are not alone."
Canberra promises major environmental law reforms by 2026, aiming to strengthen protections while balancing development and climate goals. The Australian government has vowed to overhaul the country's national environmental laws before 2026 in what it describes as the most significant reform in decades. Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek confirmed the commitment, saying the current Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation, or EPBC Act, is outdated and no longer fit to deal with challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and sustainable development. The pledge follows growing criticism from environmental groups who argue Australia's existing laws fail to provide adequate protection for threatened species and ecosystems. The government has promised to establish clearer national standards, stronger enforcement mechanisms, and streamlined approval processes that would give both developers and conservationists greater certainty. Industry groups have long complained that delays in assessments hinder investment, while environmental advocates say weak regulation has led to irreversible damage to natural habitats. The overhaul is expected to include the creation of an independent environmental protection agency to monitor compliance and enforce penalties. Plibersek stressed the reforms would balance economic growth with protecting Australia's unique natural heritage. Critics warn the government must avoid watering down protections in the name of efficiency, while business groups are urging swift passage of the new framework.
Doctors warn NSW hospitals at breaking point as 45,000 emergency cases swamp departments in just 5 days. New South Wales hospitals are experiencing unprecedented overcrowding, with senior doctors warning the crisis is among the worst they have ever seen. A surge in winter illnesses has left emergency departments struggling to cope, as more than 45,000 people presented to EDs across the state in the past 5 days. Health Minister Ryan Park said the figures highlight the extraordinary strain on the system, with staff working around the clock to keep services running. Our emergency departments are dealing with some of the highest presentation numbers we have ever seen, he said. Doctors say waiting rooms are packed with patients suffering from flu, COVID-19 and other seasonal illnesses, with ambulance delays compounding the problem. Some hospitals have reported patients waiting more than 24 hours for a bed. The Australian Medical Association warned the situation is unsustainable, urging the state government to expand capacity and provide immediate funding for additional staff. The crisis has reignited debate over chronic underinvestment in public health and the shortage of frontline workers. Mr. Park acknowledged the challenges, stressing that new measures are being fast-tracked to relieve pressure, but admitted there are no easy fixes.
A mental health crisis among Australia's youth has been laid bare, with new government data showing that a third of teenagers experienced suicidal thoughts or behavior in the past year. The alarming figure underscores the urgency for stronger intervention and greater investment in mental health services nationwide. Experts say the findings highlight how social pressures, academic stress, cost of living strains, and the lingering impacts of the pandemic continue to weigh heavily on young Australians. Health professionals warn that without robust support systems in schools and communities, the crisis could worsen. The data has prompted calls from advocacy groups for expanded early intervention programs, improved access to counseling, and more resources dedicated to suicide prevention. They argue that young people are often unable to access timely professional help due to long waiting lists and service gaps, particularly in regional areas. The government has pledged to review existing support frameworks and expand helpline resources, but critics argue immediate and comprehensive reforms are needed to save lives. The figures have intensified debate over the adequacy of Australia's mental health response, with campaigners insisting that protecting young lives must become a top priority.
Melbourne University has been found to have breached privacy laws by tracking the movements of students during campus protests in 2024, according to the Victorian Information Commissioner. The watchdog revealed the university secretly collected and stored location data through Wi-Fi and surveillance technologies without obtaining proper consent. The protests, which centered on student activism over climate change and international policy issues, saw thousands gather across campus grounds. Investigators found the university's monitoring system recorded data that could identify and trace individual participants, a move deemed unlawful and disproportionate under state privacy legislation. Privacy advocates have condemned the breach, warning it sets a dangerous precedent for surveillance within academic institutions. Universities should be places of free expression, not covert monitoring, one campaigner said. Melbourne University acknowledged the findings, but defended the practice as a measure to ensure campus safety. However, the Commissioner stressed that safety concerns must still comply with legal privacy standards. The case has reignited debate over digital rights and the extent of institutional surveillance in Australia. Calls are mounting for stronger safeguards to protect students' freedoms and stricter penalties for future breaches.
Health Canada recalls Solstice jacuzzi heat pumps, warning models could overheat, spark fires and endanger homes this summer.
Health Canada has issued a nationwide recall of thousands of swimming pool heat pumps over fears they could pose a fire hazard. The recall specifically targets several models of the Solstice/Jacuzzi 85K BTU heat pump, model S85. Officials say the units, commonly used in residential swimming pools, may overheat during operation, creating a potential fire risk. Consumers are being urged to immediately stop using the affected pumps and contact the manufacturer or distributor for repair or replacement options. Authorities warn that continued use could endanger homes and property, especially during peak summer months when pumps are running for extended hours. So far, no injuries have been reported, but Health Canada confirmed it had received complaints of overheating. The agency stressed that even without visible signs of malfunction, owners should take the recall seriously. The manufacturer has said it is cooperating fully with regulators and working to provide remedies, including refunds or safe replacements. Consumers can check the Health Canada website for details on affected serial numbers and steps to arrange corrective action.
Canada recalls Halva after pistachio-linked salmonella outbreak hospitalizes 10. Officials urge consumers to avoid affected products immediately. Health Canada has announced a nationwide recall of Halva products amid a salmonella outbreak linked to contaminated pistachios. The recall affects several brands of Halva sold across multiple provinces, with officials warning that consumers should immediately check their pantries and avoid eating any affected products. According to health authorities, at least 10 people have been hospitalized in recent weeks after contracting salmonella from pistachio-based foods, including Halva. Salmonella infection can cause serious illness, particularly in young children, elderly people, and those with weakened immune systems. Symptoms include fever, abdominal cramps, nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting, which in severe cases can require hospitalization. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, is actively investigating the distribution chain to determine the full extent of the contamination. Officials Officials have urged anyone who has purchased halva or other pistachio-based products recently to check recall notices and dispose of them safely. Retailers have been instructed to pull the products from shelves immediately. Health Canada emphasized that foodborne illness outbreaks highlight the importance of robust monitoring systems and consumer vigilance. More updates are expected as investigations continue.
Canada's healthcare sector faces mounting strain as reliance on temporary foreign workers soars, raising concerns about sustainability and staffing. Canada's healthcare sector is increasingly dependent on temporary foreign workers, with their numbers surging nearly 1,700% over the past 2 decades. New data reveals the sharp rise has coincided with mounting staff shortages, longer patient wait times, and growing burnout among Canadian nurses and doctors. Health experts argue that while temporary workers provide much-needed relief, the rapid expansion underscores deeper structural challenges within the system. Chronic underfunding, wage stagnation, and difficult working conditions have pushed many local professionals away, leaving hospitals and long-term care facilities heavily reliant on international recruits. Temporary foreign workers are filling critical gaps, but this isn't a sustainable solution, said one health policy analyst. We need to address the root causes driving domestic shortages. Critics warn that over-reliance risks creating inequities, as temporary staff often face precarious contracts, limited rights, and uncertain job security. At the same time, advocates highlight the dedication and resilience these workers bring, especially during the pandemic, when they were on the front lines of care. The federal government has pledged to review recruitment policies, but health leaders stress urgent reforms are needed to stabilize Canada's struggling system before it reaches a breaking point.
UK faces surge in low-value parcels from China, raising economic, retail and tax concerns as imports top £3 billion. The value of small parcels sent from China to the United Kingdom has surged to an estimated £3 billion, highlighting both the changing nature of international trade and the challenges facing UK retailers and policymakers. According to industry analysts, the parcels, often containing clothing, electronics, and household items, are typically shipped directly to consumers through online platforms such as Temu, Shein, and AliExpress. These goods are frequently priced below the UK's import tax threshold, enabling them to enter the country without duty or VAT, a loophole critics say places domestic retailers at a disadvantage. Experts argue that the rapid growth in such shipments underscores the growing influence of Chinese e-commerce giants in Western markets. However, UK trade bodies have raised alarm over potential revenue losses to the Treasury and the pressure placed on local businesses struggling to compete with ultra-low prices. Consumer groups, on the other hand, note that British households benefit